O come, Emmanuel.
Hey everyone, I go by VLauren on social media, but you can call me Victoria, and welcome to a special episode of Witness to Glory.
And ransom captive Israel.
So in this special episode, I'm going to be taking you along with me as I photograph the Christmas season or Christmas time as a church photographer. So in this episode, I am going to be photographing community service event right before Christmas time, rehearsals for a Christmas play, and then ultimately the Sunday before Christmas service. So I'm going to take you with me and show you my workflow, editing process, giving you some insights and some tips and advice as to how I shoot and manage what can be a quite busy 2-day schedule when it comes to photographing events. And hopefully some of the things that I show you or some aspects of my process can be helpful for you and your workflow as a church photographer, or even if you're not a church photographer. So the first thing on the agenda for this kind of jam-packed weekend right before Christmas. Wait a minute. Okay, so gear. And let me tell you something about this lens. It is 1 a.m. in the morning and it's a Sunday. I have to take photos today. And what am I doing with my life? I'll put this here, then my R6 Mark II can go there. Thinking that, if I'm gonna make a purchase for a lens, why not get the 24 to 105? Now, this is a lens initially that when I saw it came out, I was like, I thought about, who knows, maybe I could use it, maybe I could get it. But then I was like, I'm not gonna need it given, my kit. And I have all these lenses. So I'm like, nah, I don't need it. And so for the longest time, I'm like, I ain't gonna get that lens. I got the lens. This is what I got, so I'm gonna open it. Okay. Woo! A little bit ASMR. No, I'm just kidding. It's way too late for me to be doing this. Okay. So if you ever want to know what your church photographer is doing at 1 a.m., opening gear. I gotta pack my bag, put all my gear and equipment in it for church. So I use the 24 to 105 lens, primarily for the rehearsals and the community. I use the 85 also for the rehearsals. Those are the lenses that I use. So I use my R6 Mark II, my R8. So the first thing on the agenda for this kind of jam-packed weekend right before Christmas is that I have to photograph this community give back, community giveaway, holiday food distribution. So when it comes to photographing community service events like this, I don't necessarily have a plan, which kind of sounds bad. But the thing is, if you've been photographing in a particular context for a while, you kind of just know things like the back of your hand. So it's like, even though if you don't have like an actual plan written out, like in your mind, you can map out how you want to photograph the event. So for me, I don't necessarily have like a plan in terms of like, I'm going to get this shot. My approach rather than plan is to just photograph what is happening. What moments do I think will ultimately be used to encapsulate what the heart of the event is. And so to break down my approach a little bit more better and detailed to offer some insight, I would say the most important thing when it comes to photographing these type of events for me is knowing your context. And so knowing your context involves knowing the people and the environment. The focus of these type of events is for the church to be like the hands and feet of Jesus by actually taking care of those in need. So when it comes to these type of contexts, you realize you are interacting with communities that could be more vulnerable, right? And so for me, when it comes to ethics as a photographer, I'm always conscientious of that. So the focus of my subjects are the people that are actually serving rather than those who are receiving or those who are in need, which might be a vulnerable community or a vulnerable population of people. So even if I seek to photograph people who are receiving these elements, I don't document their faces. And, there's something I think to be said about that, creating visibility for vulnerable populations, but I don't think this context is appropriate for that. Unless there are instances where people have no problem getting photographed. My approach is to mainly photograph the people who are serving. I think it's important as a church photographer that we highlight this aspect of the church, because oftentimes one of the criticisms when it comes to churches, and I guess this criticism comes from people who don't see what the church actually does, is that the church is always giving, right? Obviously, there are churches that are highlighted in media for greed and corruption, but there are so many churches that hold regular food distributions, that have food pantries, kitchens, that are always helping those in need. What I want to highlight in my work, the items and then also the people serving. So since I have that type of awareness, then my focus is to just capture what is happening. So when it comes to these type of events, I don't really take a lot of creative liberties. The most creative liberty I will take when it comes to composition is just reducing the shutter speed so that I can show how much movement is happening in a scene. If I'm going to use composition techniques, I will use over the shoulder shots if some people who are serving don't feel like they're photo ready. So you can see some of them in frame, but primarily the focus is on what they're actually doing. Or I would do side profile shots, or I would photograph the backs of people who are receiving the elements. That's where I use composition elements the most, is when I'm trying to protect the identities and faces of people who may, one, be part of a vulnerable community, two, don't feel like they're photo worthy, right? But I still want to show the action. In that sense, my composition is not about a creative liberty, but more so about photographing the humanity of the moment. Now, that's just my personal ethic. Essentially, the way that I'm thinking long term is that I want to capture moments that can not only be used for social media purposes, but also that can be evergreen content for the church's website. In this particular context, think about this too. It's the holidays. So what are you going to see? People are wearing... Okay. So in this context, people are wearing Santa hats. So obviously those images work in the short term because it's the holidays. But in the long term, if you put that on the church website, it's well, are they always wearing Santa hats when they give back? No. So the thing is, I want to photograph people who have Santa hats and people who don't, right? Because the people who don't, that's going to be the evergreen content, which means that it's just pretty much content that can last no matter the season, and it works. And then I want to show people who are wearing the Santa hats, which those photos can be, used for social media in their short term. So context is not only just people and environment, but it's also thinking about the time period, what's happening during this time. Speaking on the environment, so I think it's important, if you are mapping things out, to know where things are or what's happening, in the building that you're working in. Always having an exit strategy so you can go to other locations to photograph. So when it comes to environment, it's not just the physical building itself, but also weather conditions. So when it comes to community givebacks, community service related events that are hosted by churches, some churches cancel when it rains or when it snows, other churches don't. In the dead of winter, freezing cold, my hands were going numb, the wind was violently hurling flurries around, people were out there serving, giving back to those in need. Knowing the environment, not just the physical building, but also what the weather conditions are, I think will be helpful to you and your gear. I didn't have any protection on my gear when it snowed, or even on this particular day. I'm the R6 Mark II, they weather sealed, they good. They'll be all right. I mean, I've seen, Peter McKinnon and co, out there in harsh conditions using Canon gear. So I said, I'll be fine. Just make sure you can wipe off your lenses, while you go. But okay, if your stuff isn't weather sealed, then I don't recommend you do that. Try to find some sort of protection for it. But, like to live on the edge. something that I typically do anytime I'm photographing these type of events. And I like to write down or jot down quotes that I hear that get to the heart of why they're serving. I think if you understand the why or the motivation, it can help give you an appreciation for what you're doing. And I think you would look for moments to photograph. Like, it grounds and connects you with everybody else to see like what the bigger picture is. Like some quotes that I've jotted down: prepared, committed, and passionate about sharing the love of Jesus Christ. So when I heard that said, I said, let me go ahead and write this down, because I think, one, it's good that it could be used for the copy for social media, but that I also thought that this is good to have in mind as I photograph, because I want to take photographs that showed that preparedness, that show that commitment, and that show the passion that the people that are a part of this ministry have for serving the community. And so I think if you pay attention to what is said, is that it helps to create a theme in your mind so that you can get images that go along with that theme. And I think that's what helps in creating like the narrative structure when it comes to photographic documentation. I think photographing events like this get to the heart of what it means to be a witness to glory. Not just because that's the name of the series, but because it's like we have the privilege of witnessing the church's mission to give back and spread the gospel in a practical, hands-on way. While I was photographing the community event, I was also simultaneously photographing the rehearsals for the Christmas play. I wasn't only photographing the rehearsals for the Christmas play for the sake of getting behind the scenes content, but rehearsals are also rehearsals for me as a photographer. So one thing that I highlighted in, I think it was the episode on a guide to church photography, but one of the things that is very important to me as a church photographer is being mindful of my movement and position. So as I'm watching the cast rehearse, I am also thinking about, where can I stand in the sanctuary? Or if I need to go to the balcony, to figure out where are the best positions for me to be out of the way, but that I can also get some interesting photographs. I'm thinking about, okay, if they're going to use a center aisle, if they're going to use, this aisle or that aisle, I'm like, well, I'm not going to stand in those areas. Let me see like a good seat that I can find too, where I can sit and like be able to document all of the action. So I took the rehearsals as an opportunity to get photographs that I don't need to focus on getting on Sunday. So rehearsals are a great way for me to see that for myself, where I can sit. It's not only about photographing the behind the scenes, but it gives me indication of how I can map out my strategy for movement and positioning on the day of the service. Unlike the community give back, as I was saying before, where I was focusing on documentation, I took more creative liberty when it actually came to composition. So this is something that I highly advise and recommend, especially if you are a church photographer or work in spaces where rehearsals need to be done. Like if you work with productions and things of that nature and you are photographing behind the scenes content. Like, behind the scenes content is cool and it's important. I love photographing those type of moments, but also what filming behind the scenes or rehearsals, specifically rehearsals, can do is that it helps you to experiment with different styles of shooting that you can then apply on the day of, say, that Sunday service. So I highly advise, like, if you have the opportunity to photograph rehearsals. What I will add to photographing rehearsals is that, especially like, say, if you're photographing like choir rehearsals, praise team rehearsals, they're not coming to the rehearsals thinking that they need to dress up because you're going to be photographed, right? So you should be mindful of those things if you are in positions where you can photograph rehearsals. It was so funny because, like, even when I was photographing the rehearsals, somebody was like, she taking candids, y'all. And I was like, I'm the candid queen. Of course I am, right? But the thing is, I feel like, even with the candids that I do capture, I think, I don't think I do that bad, We got to remember the humanity of the moment. In the last episode of how can you love people well? And so one thing to keep in mind is how people will perceive themselves in the photos that you take of them. I highly recommend that you watch that last episode if you didn't, because I think it helps to give us a more loving mindset and approach to photographing people, not just in church, but in all context. I think that helps us in building trust so that when people see with the camera, they can trust you, and the proof is in the results of your work. So I'll just say, keep that in mind. Photographing these back-to-back events, I hate having a backlog of images to edit. Like, I like to have a clear mind. I like to edit and send off these photos and just be done with it. So usually what happens is that for like when I photograph Sunday services, I do a same day delivery of the photo. So shoot, edit, deliver, right? And recently I had like such a backlog of work to edit that I would do like next day delivery, but making sure that I edit the key images that can be used for like social media. So when it comes to these like rehearsal shots, the community shots, like I have an urgency to edit them, but not so much of an urgency that they have to be delivered on the same day, that I can have some days even after that Sunday service to deliver those edits. And that's why I say context is key, because if you photograph in a particular context and you've created presets for those images and you know how the lighting works in those spaces, and you can just put your presets on it and just, the culling process, make it a lot easier. I mean, hey. But one thing I would say when it comes to the culling process, one thing that I've been employing, little techniques that you can use in Lightroom. So one, reject bad images, and you can search through that album on Lightroom and select all of those images that are rejected and delete those. One thing that you can also do in your culling process is that edit and cull as you go. So I would go through the whole set of images that I imported into Lightroom, edit the ones that are good. I will leave the bad ones unedited. I will search through that album. I would select the unedited images, and then I would delete them and then only keep the edited images, and then do my final touches on them so I can send them out. That can work too. Or you can do both, where I would edit an image and reject the bad ones at the same time, so that I know the images that are dimmed out are the ones that are rejected, and the images that are good are the ones that I've already started to edit. So that just helps me to cull down a lot quicker, especially when I have to do like back-to-back events type like these, or when I have so much photos that there's a backlog when it comes to the editing. So I hope that helps. So this is like a snapshot, pun intended, for what a weekend before Christmas might look like for a church photographer. So just to recap some of the techniques and approaches that I use as a photographer, hopefully it can be helpful to you. If you do church photography, or maybe if you don't and you're just a photographer and enjoy the content and you learn valuable information from me in my experience, these are some of the things that you can definitely keep in mind or consider as a food for thought, So one, knowing your context well is key to photographing it better. To add to that context, you can jot down some memorable quotes, key phrases, and themes. Use rehearsals as a rehearsal for yourself, and take advantage of photographing rehearsals for creative experimentation. And ultimately, I think that by employing some of these tips and strategies, it can make us trustworthy and informed witnesses to glory. Merry Christmas.